there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Where you gonna be tonight? Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Get ready for the rest of your life. Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome to SassafrasCast. Third time's the charm. This is my third time with a false start trying to record this episode. If you're tuned in and you're watching the broadcast live, my goodness, I apologize. It's been that kind of morning, but here we are. I think we're good. We're going to get started. This is episode number 57, How the Bleep Do I Heal My Inner Self? And let me tell you a few things since I'm here. My name is Rorie, and I am a tarot reader, singer-songwriter, and all-around personal growth nerd from Long Island, New York. And I'm about to shout out to my patrons in this episode. If you didn't know, that is a patron bonus. If you sign up and support this podcast, you get a shout out in every episode. You also get access to a Discord community full of like-minded, witchy, psycho-spiritual humans. And depending on the level at which you sign up, you also get card pulls and you get bonus episodes. Let me give everybody a shout because everyone's getting a shout out right now. You ready? Here we go. Shout out to Mindful Marks, Phoebe, Rachel Miller, Anti-Fragile Tarot, Grayson, Periwinkle Twilight, Rebecca Jones, Brittany, Hannah Westlock, Brittany Campbell, Ginger Dawn Studios, Anna Avendroth, Jen McPhail, and Ondine PM. Thank you so much for supporting my world. The shout outs are a little different every month because it's based on who is a current patron. I try to just always pull it up and see right in the moment, which is why sometimes it takes me a minute because I want to just shout out to everyone in real time correctly. And I'd always rather shout out to too many people than too few. I don't want to leave anyone off the bus. Can y'all tell I'm a little frazzled this morning? I'm in the middle of a move. Everything's changing for me. Or I guess one big thing is changing, which is going to be where I live. But that means a few other things change, And, I'm just, like all of us, it seems, this busy summer season. And in 2025 generally, I'm just a human, doing my best to do the right thing and show up for myself and show up for the world and show up right against fascism and do all the things. And sometimes, y'all, that leads to frazzlement. I'm about to dive into the witchy weather report, but first let me tell you a little bit about this episode. The topic of this episode is How the Bleep Do I Heal My Inner Self? This is part of my How the Bleep series because it's been fun. It's just been a fun source of inspiration, I guess, for me to approach a podcast topic this way. How the bleep do I do this? It's like those books, which I guess still exist, that used to get to the library, The Complete Idiot's Guide to blah, 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 blah. That's the energy, is ground up. And, here's how we dive into this topic and make it very accessible. But I'm also taking a little bit of a deeper dive. So even if this is a topic that you're familiar with or have already done some work in or a bunch of work in, my purpose here is to make this a meaningful episode for everyone, no matter where you're at in your practice. And certainly when it comes to self-healing, there's so many different ways to approach that topic. My way might be different from your way. And I think all paths are good. You know what I mean? The truth about self-healing is the word self is in there on purpose. We have to find our own path. And so when I present this information, as with any podcast, it's me sharing what has worked for me, what has not worked for me, what has been meaningful in my practice in this particular journey. And it's not meant to tell you what to do or not do. It's meant for you to look at it and compare notes with your own experiences and say, that might work for me. I'm going to try it. Or, you know what? That would never work for me. I'll move on to the next thing, right? Everyone gets to have their own experience. I'm not this didactic person who thinks that everything has to be a certain way. Let's dive into the witchy weather report. During the Witchy Weather Report, I talk a little bit about the energy of the moment, and I pull a card for everyone. Let me tell you about the energy of the moment. It's endings and beginnings season again. And I can tell you this with certainty because I've been doing a lot of tarot readings. I've been doing plenty of tarot events as well as, this type of reading online and those kind of things. Everyone is going through a series of endings and beginnings, or one or the other. There are people who are very much in new beginning, fresh start mode already, and there are people who are like, I'd really like that to happen. I'm still in the ending mode. And what I would tell those people is you can actually do both at once. You can have an ending that is lagging behind. Like, endings and beginnings are like a fade in and a fade out. I think I've talked about this before, right? It's like fading out on the last song and fading in on the new song. And even if there's a chapter of your life that you need to put behind you, but things are taking their time to settle out, you can fade in as early as you like on the new chapter. You can say, well, I know the next chapter is going to be about this, so let me at least start. And maybe all you have is a few minutes a day to devote to that energy, and that's okay, right? Like, the way that we manifest change in our life is by pointing ourselves in a direction and saying, that's where I'm going, and meaning it, and then we just start walking. We don't have to have everything between point A and point B figured out. We don't have to know the exact path. We point ourselves in the direction and we start walking. And yes, along the way, we will come to obstacles. We will come to things that we don't know how to overcome. We will come to difficulties. That's called life. That's what it means to be on a journey. That's why it's a journey and not like this instantaneous destination. And I think sometimes people sell manifestation that way as like, oh, it's like an instantaneous destination. It's like snapping your fingers and you have your what you want. It's wish fulfillment. Boy, does the phrase wish fulfillment get thrown around a real lot by various tarot readers on, Instagram and TikTok. And it's not that I'm not about wish fulfillment. I love it. I'm always telling people to make wishes. I love making a wish. It's more that life is meant to be a complex journey. And when we want our wish to come true, a large part of the meaning of our experience comes out of us having the journey along the way to our wish coming true. Comes out of us learning what we need to learn about ourselves. Comes out of the level ups that we get. Like, yeah, it's great to get to the finish line and be like, I did this, but all of the level ups along the way are what make it meaningful, right? When you go to school and then you graduate, it's great to have that piece of paper and be like, wow, now I'm an official whatever, and this says something about me. But that paper represents the journey you just took. That paper represents all of the self-improvement you just did, all of the learning, all of the hard work you put in, all of the things you learned about yourself as a learner along the way. That paper represents the bigger journey. And I think sometimes we try to short circuit the journey, and I say this as someone who's on a journey that I know I don't get to short circuit. It takes its time. And surrendering to it is the easiest and most difficult thing in the world, right? Anyway, it's ending and beginning season, so allow yourself that as a grain of salt as you have different interactions with people. People are in transitional times in their life. Change tends to frighten people. Even good change tends to frighten people. In fact, I'm always saying nothing will trigger your shadow work faster than going after your big dream. That will absolutely bring up your shadow self and show you where you need to do the work. And so people are in it. People are in the soup. Even if good changes are happening, people are in the soup a little bit. So have some grace, with yourself and with others around that when you're having difficult conversations, things like that. Consider that there is this extenuating circumstance of everyone is having change in their life right now. Not to mention, I don't need to mention it, everything that's going on in the world, in America. I am recording this, and then going out to go to a protest. And I feel pretty safe saying that. It's difficult because people are signing up for protests this year, which is kind of a new thing. That's not a thing we ever used to do. You just would show up at the protest. And there's safety in not signing up and giving a handy dandy list to the government of everyone who, has a problem with the government policies. But a lot of people are signing up now. And I still don't sign up for protests. I just identify when they are and I show up. And I don't talk about the specific things I'm doing ahead of time very much. I just show up to them. And that's like a little bit of a personal safety thing for me. But, this broadcast is happening live for people that I know, for my patrons. And later, when it goes out, the protest will already have happened. So I think it's safe. I think it's okay. We all got to do what we can do in these times. And we all have to identify what that is for us. But importantly, it needs to not be nothing. We need to not give ourselves the excuse of, oh, my life is so busy, I just don't have time for this. And I'm speaking to me as well as to everyone else right now. As people who are spiritually engaged, as people who are committed to doing the work, and if you listen to this podcast, I believe you are someone who's committed to doing the work, because like low key, that's what the whole podcast is about. Like, yes, it is through a psycho-spiritual witchy lens, but it really is about doing the work. It's about showing up for yourself and for everyone in your life in that way by doing the work. And as people who are committed to doing the work, we have to do the external work as well as the internal work. We have to show up as foot soldiers of justice and allies to the oppressed. If we're going to walk our walk, we have to do it. And if there are things that we can't do, that's okay. We don't have to do everything. We have to do something. If you can't go to a protest, maybe you can pick up the phone and call your senator. If you have the money to donate to the ACLU, they're fighting a lot of battles right now for us, for our civil liberties, because that's literally what they do. If you don't have the money to do that, maybe you can, join a phone bank. There's 1,000,001 ways to get involved, and they're all meaningful, and they're only meaningful if you do them, right? We talked a little bit earlier about showing up for the journey. We can't just wring our hands and say, wow, I hope things change. It's really tough out there. We have to be a part of the change. And it's okay if we're a small part. There's a lot of people in the world. There's a lot of people in this country. Many hands make light work, but each of those hands does have to be doing something, even if it's small, right? All right. Lecture over. Here's our card for the moment. Our card for the moment is the Hierophant. Think about what your driving force is in this life, especially in terms of your moral compass. And not just your moral compass, but who you are in relation to your community, who you are in relation to the world around you, as well as the spiritual world. The Hierophant bridges the gap between these two worlds. The High Priestess is seen as a spiritual seeker in tarot and has her own, her practice is very inward. She achieves enlightenment by turning inward, not outward, right? And the Hierophant blends the internal and the external, right? It takes the inward journey and it makes it accessible to everyone. And so at times this is healthy, and at times it's too much, right? We can see the Hierophant in a negative light in the way that, for example, like the Catholic Church for many years, would gatekeep spiritual practices, like making it seem as though only certain men of God could speak to the divine, and you would have to have a relationship with the divine through whatever they said, right? And that, while it might make it easy for the average person to approach something deep and spiritual, also means that it ties our hands, right? We can't have a personal relationship in that way. And I think that globally, our conversation around spirituality has evolved there. I think that many people who view themselves as spiritual people, which not everyone does, and that's very okay. But I would make the case, again, as someone who makes a podcast that's pretty much about doing the work and doesn't require any specific belief, I would make the case that the High Priestess represents seeking enlightenment through turning inward, and that that's accessible to everyone, regardless of what they believe, right? Whether you are seeking to connect with a higher power, or whether you are meditating because you have read the multiple studies that say that meditation has numerous benefits, seeking enlightenment by turning inward is kind of my phrase for that. It's like we are taking the time for stillness. We're taking the time to show up for our inner selves. And the Hierophant bridges the gap between what does that look like on a personal level, and then putting that into practice externally. Think about the preacher in the pulpit in a positive way, not a negative way, because yes, there are people who use this kind of, the Hierophant is an influencer, right? The Hierophant is like the person, the teacher, the preacher, the, the person who seems to have a connection to greater wisdom. And you can use or abuse that influence, right? And we've certainly seen, especially in the Black community in America, we've seen spiritual leaders use their influence for good to motivate political change and political action, for example, right? We have also seen, in America, very conservative hate-mongering churches use their influence for bad, right? Use their influence to spread ideologies of hate. And I'm not here, and both of these, I'm talking about Christianity here, though I'm not a Christian, because Christianity is the dominant religion in America and a big piece of American culture, even if it's not, or shouldn't be a part of our government, and we have to ask ourselves as spiritual individuals where our spirituality meets the real world right now, where our spiritual drive, where our quest, our very, very personal internal quest for enlightenment, we must take those gifts, those spiritual fruits, or psychological fruits, if we're not approaching it from a, spiritual place. We must take the fruits of our labor of turning inward, of showing up for the small, quiet voice. And we must ask ourselves how we can enact them in the real world. It's not enough just to get still and sit with it and be one with the universe. Just as it's not enough to be an ally in the form of, oh, I don't have a problem with Black people. I don't have a problem with gay people. Friends, that's not allyship. It's neutrality, right? To be a true ally means you stand up for Black people, means you stand up for queer people, means you stand up for women, for people of color, for religious minorities. To be a true ally means that you don't just say, oh, you're okay, I'm okay. No, that's neutrality. To be an ally, you must stand up and speak out and say, I'm showing up for what's right, and I see that you have not been receiving fairness and justice, and I'm standing up to change that, right? That's what an ally really does. Similarly, in our spiritual lives, when we receive enlightenment as a result of our stillness, when we receive the ability to say, okay, sitting with myself on this topic has shown me that my anger has a valid message, for example, but doesn't have to be acted out in an inflammatory way, that perhaps it can be channeled into something positive. It's not just enough to let that, to sit there in our spiritual growth and feel like, wow, look at me, I'm so spiritual, right? It's not just enough to do that unless we allow it to better ourselves as people and to change the impact we're having on the world. And while I believe deeply and do my best, especially as my own spiritual beliefs grow and change and become more specific, and I speak freely about them, but it's always important to me to make my different shares and ideas accessible to people who have different spiritual beliefs than me. I value diversity in that way, right? And I value us coming together over perhaps common values, even if we have different ways of arriving at those values. At the same time, we must live our values. And if we find values of peace and stillness and quiet, it is our responsibility as people who have done that work and received the fruits of that labor. It is our responsibility to look beyond ourselves and ask ourselves, I've received peace as a result of this labor. How can I be an agent of peace now in the universe, right? I have received greater enlightenment, greater self-awareness as a result of this labor. How can I now be a foot soldier of greater enlightenment and greater awareness? And when I say things like foot soldier, I'm not talking about angry missionaries. I'm talking about how can I show up for the values of stillness, for the values of inner work, for the values of peace, for the values of justice. How can I show up? How can I look at a world that clearly is in need of some of these values? And how can I do so in a way that is actually helpful and functional, right? And that will vary depending on your community and depending on what hurdles you face. And right now, for me, and I think for many, it takes the form of social justice, because yes, my spirituality has given me many gifts, and also I'm watching the world be really damaged and harmed by specifically privileged men who live a life that is grounded more in entitlement than in stillness, than in diversity, than in curiosity for the experiences of others. And so I view it as my job not to sit there and be like, wow, those silly guys, which is true. But my job is to ask myself, how can I be an agent of positive change? How can I fight for what's right? Because I have to tell you, and it's a slippery spiritual slope, because yes, we do value peace. Those of us who have learned to turn inwards have learned that there are times when our emotionality is a messenger to be heard rather than a big thing to be irrationally acted out, right? That when we slow down and pay attention, that we can gain more of a message than when we act out reactively. And yet at the same times, we must act. We don't get a pass. More than anyone, we don't get a pass. If we're doing the work and receiving the benefits of that work of turning inward, more than anyone, we don't get a pass. We must ask ourselves every day how we can act for a more just world. And I know this sounds like, I know I'm preaching a little bit, but I think we all have to ask ourselves what that looks like every single day and how we can contribute. I'm going to move into the topic of the day. You've had enough preaching from Rorie this morning. We're going to talk about how the bleep do I heal my inner self. However, there's a connection here, and the reason I've been so tuned into this energy of we don't just turn inward, we act on the knowledge we receive is because that is true. It's true on a macro and a micro level, and I've been talking about the macro level. I've been talking about you tuning in, finding yourself, and then turning out and asking yourself, how can I bring, my newly acquired wisdom? How can I bring my newly acquired stillness? How can I be of service to the world with what I have learned, right? And when we heal ourselves, we have to have that same attitude of willingness to apply what we learn. We can't just do the inner child meditation and cry it out and have catharsis and then not change the way we treat ourselves. Right? And that's one example among many, right? It's not hard. And when I learned, when I was training to be a crisis counselor, which was something I did in my early 20s, it was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. And that training, it was a 9-month training program, really 18-month, because then there was on the phone training as well. When I did that training, all of the information that I learned there stuck with me. And it was as broad as they could get while still being functional, because I had to answer the hotlines and talk to people in a variety of different kinds of crises and be able to not only connect them with the resources they needed, but meet them where they were at so that they'd be able to use them. And that has informed who I am as a tarot reader, and it's informed who I am as a human being. And it's affirmed a lot of things that I kind of in my inner self knew to be true and found deeper scholarship with in that training. And what I want to talk to you about now is that we did spend some time in one of our classes talking about the danger of catharsis. That was the phrase, the danger of catharsis. The danger of catharsis being that you can have a cathartic moment. What is cathartic? It means cathartic moments are the moments where you have a big emotional release. Perhaps you have an epiphany, and along with it comes a big release of emotion, right? You're thinking about a topic and you're kind of replaying the events of an argument to yourself, and you suddenly realize, wow, I can't have this argument one more time. I have to change my behavior. I have to change it. This can't work. This isn't working anymore, right? And you get this big rush of emotion, and it feels like relief because you're because the truth sets you free, because you had a realization. And that's beautiful. And then you have to act on it, right? To have that cathartic moment of wow, I can't do this anymore. I have to make a change. When we really feel it in our hearts, it feels good. And we have to not let that be the end, right? We have to not just seek the dopamine hit or whatever. I'm not sure what chemicals are coursing through our body in that moment, right? We have to not just seek the emotional gratification of having that deep realization and not commit to the follow through. And we talked about this a lot on the crisis center hotlines, because When somebody makes a call and says, I'm in crisis and I need help and I need resources, often just talking to someone who wants to hear and wants to be there for them gives them a great deal of catharsis, right? When you have a big problem and you finally get to talk to someone who just listens and cares and is willing to see you, is willing to listen, to understand, not just to respond, who is willing to like really hear your experience and ask you how you're feeling and care about the answer. When you have been kind of struggling in solitude with a problem, it feels very cathartic. It feels very meaningful. And it also doesn't solve the problem, right? It's one part of it, right? Like it helps you, get that sense of seeing and understanding, but you called to help solve a problem. And if I make you feel seen and you're like, wow, thank you so much, I feel better, and you hang up the phone and tomorrow morning you wake up with the same problem, I didn't do my job, right? I did my job if, in addition to making you feel seen, I gave you resources and we had a conversation. How would you feel about trying this? How would you feel about making this phone call? How would you feel about having this conversation? And you walk away with a game plan. And that was true when I was a crisis counselor, and it's true as a tarot reader. Like, that is my belief on what makes a good tarot reading good, is that it's actionable. And importantly, that it makes you feel empowered to take the action. And when we talk about self-healing, to go back to those inner child meditations that maybe make us cry it out, they feel cathartic. Yeah, sometimes just moving the stuck emotions can change everything, but we do have to follow through and do the action. If we realize, oh my gosh, if we have an inner experience through journaling or through therapy or through whatever, we realize, oh my God, I've been treating myself this way for so many years because, I don't know, because my mother did, because someone around me did, because I got this messaging when I was young. That can be so cathartic. We can like have that big emotional moment of like, oh God, this is why, right? And feel it and it feels like a breakthrough, right? But it's only a breakthrough if we follow through. If we have the realization, wow, I've been treating myself this way because X, and we cry it out and we have that, wow, that release of tension that comes with figuring it out, we do have to get up the next day and begin to learn how to treat ourselves differently. We do have to walk, right? When we have the cathartic moment, we've aligned ourselves now with the key, with the solution. We've said, wow, I've been treating myself this way for all of these years. And the subtext there is, I don't have to, right? I can make a new choice. The solution is learning to treat ourselves better, perhaps, than we were treated when we were younger, or learning a different way of talking to ourselves than we learned when we were younger. And we've aligned ourselves, we've seen it, like, wow, I don't have to do this self-sabotage. And then we have to follow through and learn something different to do instead. It's not just about stopping, it's about starting something else. And it's about the reality that habits take time to change, right? We can't expect everything to be fixed because we had one cathartic moment. Sometimes it does give us enough momentum that it carries us through the difficult things, right? Sometimes, have you ever had an epiphany like that where you're like, wow, this has to change? And that one moment gave you the strength to follow through, right? To make a big, big dramatic change in your life. I've definitely had a few pivotal moments like that. However, like, it's all about the follow through. We can't have this big realization and say, wow, I finally figured it out. I don't have to treat myself like this. I can treat myself like this. I don't have to be a stage mom to myself. I can be a loving parent to myself, like whatever it is, right? We then have to go through our daily lives and pay attention and identify, oh, this is a part of that behavior. I'm doing that in a small micro way right now. Oh, this is an opportunity to choose a new behavior, right? And that's like a lot of hard work. We're suddenly reviewing a lot of stuff that was just normal and subconscious for us. And now we have to do the work to keep it in our conscious mind so we can make the changes. We have to do the follow through. And so I implore you, as I share these different techniques and ideas with you, that you remember that the real magic is in the follow through. I can give you, as a reader, for example, I can give you a very cathartic tarot reading. And I have to tell you, I have a lot of people, not everyone, I have a lot of people cry at my table when I read. And I consider that to be a successful reading if it feels like, A, they got their feelings, like they felt their feelings as they needed to, and B, they feel empowered to move forward in a healthy way. Both criteria must be met, and sometimes all a person needs in that moment is to be seen, and they need the space to just feel before they take the action. And I'm here for that. We need that space, right? Sometimes the next step is continue to feel it out until we understand better what we need, right? Let the backlog of emotions out, right? And sometimes the next step is have a conversation I don't want to have, or do something that I know is ultimately what I have to do, but it's hard, right? And it's a successful reading if they both have the cathartic experience and then go out and in their power create that change. And so what you need to understand is I never get to find out if my readings are successful or not. Unless if it's a client that comes back to me repeatedly, I find out. If it's a dear friend that I've been reading for, I find out because I get to see what they do and they share with me, right? But most of the time, the vast majority of the time, I read for people once, I might never see them again. And I might know there was that cathartic moment, and I don't know if they went and followed through or if they fell into an old pattern. And I choose to hold space and believe that they can make that big, wise choice for themselves, right? But I know that probably it's unrealistic to think that happens 100% of the time. And I have to live in the uncertainty and simply do my best. And that in itself is a lesson. So let's talk about how the BLEEP we heal our inner self. I chose this wording very carefully because I think a lot of us talk about inner child work. And over the last couple years in particular, as I've been working with people in my self-care classes and at the tarot table and just in conversation, it's become very clear to me that healing our wounds is about more than just our inner child. That sometimes it's our inner teenager. That sometimes it's our inner 5 minutes ago, right? We can have experiences that are traumatic or that influence our future or that change our mindset at any times in our lives. And it is true that there's a lot of stuff from our childhood that does kind of imprint on us. And it's true that that can be uniquely difficult to get at because a lot of it we learn when we are pre-verbal, right? We are sponges when we're kids. That's how we learn to speak. There is a time before we know how to speak where we're learning the language and we're also learning a host of other things. And they just feel natural to us as we get older, just as it feels natural for you and me right now to be speaking and hearing each other and understanding each other if you're a hearing person, or if you're reading captions on the YouTube video, then understanding my words in that way. But the truth is, we had to learn how to speak. We just don't remember doing it. And a lot of this type of inner programming we learned, but we don't remember learning it. So A, it feels like, I don't know, is this real? Like nature versus nurture. And B, it's like hard to get at it because some of it's just emotional. Some of it's just felt. Like we have to kind of bring it up and put it into words so that we can understand it better. But that's not how we absorbed it, right? And so, yes, inner child work is important because we're learning how to dismantle this kind of stuff that we learned and absorbed before we had the words to think really critically about it. And so it is very important work. But also when we are experiencing any type of trauma, any type of triggering moment, anything that activates our fight or flight or our amygdala, our ability to think critically and form memories is impacted. I'm talking neuroscience now. I'm talking the science of trauma. I'm not talking woo-woo. And go read, I highly recommend The Body Keeps the Score, which is the seminal work on this. And there's a lot of work since on trauma. And it really was the kind of groundbreaking book that talked about studies of trauma above and beyond simply studying PTSD in veterans, but trauma broadly, which helps us understand it better for veterans and the general population, right? When we're having traumatic experiences, it's difficult for us to form memories, and our higher cognitive parts of our brain are not online. Our amygdala, which is kind of the more of the animal fight or flight, get me out of this mess part of our brain, is the part of our brain that's most activated. And so when we're unraveling trauma, whether it comes from when we were 5 years old or whether it comes from when we were 50 years old, we are still dealing with the part of our brain that is not lingual. We are still dealing with the part of our brain that maybe doesn't remember it super clearly. We're still dealing with the part of our brain that's reactive rather than necessarily recording very accurate factual memories. And that's not for me I don't say that to gaslight us. I say that to let us know we're doing difficult work. And we're doing difficult work that's difficult in the same way it's difficult to remember a very early memory from your childhood. It's a common question. People ask you, what is your earliest memory? And like icebreakers or, just like, or in guided meditations or something like that. But what's your earliest memory? Or what's your earliest memory about blah, blah, blah? And you try to think about it. And often those memories are like, in the scheme of things, not all that early, right? Like, often people come up with stuff from when they were like 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, and it's like you have 6 whole years of memories before that. But because some of them were pre-verbal and some of them were not pre-verbal, but maybe before you had the complex understanding of certain different topics, right? It's more difficult to put into words and thus more difficult for us, our thinking brains, to access it, right? The curse of knowledge means that it's harder for us to remember what it was like before we had the knowledge. And this experience is replicated during trauma. Have you ever had a fight or had a scary situation like a near-miss car accident or an actual car accident or whatever, where your heart was in your throat, right? And then later, you probably remember certain details in great detail, right? Where the world seems to slow down to you and your reaction time. And there's probably also stuff that you don't remember, it's like, and then I was at the hospital, it's like our brain skips over parts of the story that probably just simply didn't get recorded because we were so in the moment of just like, I have to respond to the problem. I can't and even me saying those words, I have to respond to the problem. That wasn't a conscious thought, right? It was just our amygdala going like, danger. And when we have those experiences, it affects our ability to record memory. And so trying to piece them back together and then our ability to recall it. And so trying to piece them back together and trying to learn from them is as difficult as it is to try to remember something that happened when we were 2.5 years old. Right? So I'm talking about healing our inner self because I think every age of our self needs healing. And I don't want us to limit our inner self to our childhood, although I want us to show up for our childhood and our puberty and for all other parts of ourselves, right? Let's talk about some different ways that we can show up for self-healing. Firstly, our subconscious can be our guide, and our subconscious is a great ally here because while we consciously, a lot of us forget that we didn't always speak the language we speak. And we see this every time we see a conversation on the internet about whether or not different people have an inner monologue. There were a couple of studies that came out that were grossly misunderstood, I felt, by the vast number of people who read them, about what the nature of thinking is like. And what came out, the headline that kind of came out and made, captured everybody's attention was that not everyone has an inner monologue, meaning an inner verbal monologue where I'm speaking to you right now. The headline that came out was like, not everyone is thinking thoughts constantly in complete sentences. And a lot of people are like, what do you mean you don't have an inner monologue? And I think they meant, what do you mean you don't have inner thoughts? What do you mean you're not having reactions to different things that are happening without realizing that probably there's a lot of things that they're thinking about without language throughout the day, right? You don't think with language about how to make your coffee in the morning usually. You don't have, maybe you do. I don't have an inner monologue saying, now I will measure the coffee. Now I will pour things in a mug. Like I don't have to go through those instructions to myself, right? I just do it. And yes, I am kind of thinking about it. I'm like, I wake up and I think about coffee, but I'm kind of like thinking about what it'll feel to have some coffee in my body or what it'll smell like or whatever. Not necessarily thinking the thought, I would like to have some coffee now, right? And it's proof to me when I see so many people be like, what do you mean you don't have an inner monologue? And what they mean is that they imagine this means that this person is unable to have verbal thoughts inside of their head and lives in some crazy other alien world. And it's like, no, I think all of us can think thoughts in words inside of our heads. And the truth is that our ability, our inner landscape has the ability to think thoughts beyond our conception of language. And of course it does, because you didn't always know how to speak a language, right? We all learned a language when we were whatever age, right? Depending on, like different people develop at different times. Some babies say their first words at 6 months. For some of them, it's when they're toddlers. It's just like whatever, And even then, you're in the process of learning a language, right? When babies have a handful of words and can kind of communicate with you, they're not doing it with an inner monologue. They have ideas. And they're finding different ways through speech, through body language, to assert those ideas, right? And our subconscious mind is more tuned in and connected with those other ways of thinking, those nonverbal ways of thinking in symbols, thinking in feelings, thinking in movements, right? Thinking in concepts, and then finding the words for those concepts, right, is a conscious mind activity. Our conscious mind might wake up from a nightmare and not be able to explain why it was scary. But we're like, it felt very scary. I just can't tell you why. Like we review the events of it and we're like, this actually isn't. Sometimes a nightmare is very obvious. It's like, there was a guy coming after me with a knife, right? Sometimes it's like, I felt so terrified, but what was actually happening wasn't like, when I describe it, it doesn't sound as scary as it was, right? And it's like our language falls short. And the subconscious mind has, we don't want to admit it, a better grasp of communication and description than our limited grasp of our conscious mind and our language. And that's the curse of knowledge. We learned the language that we speak, colloquially with others. Maybe we speak several verbal languages, right? And we forget that there is a much greater range of expression and understanding available to us. Our subconscious mind speaks sometimes in symbolism, can be very hard to figure out. However, it, for that very reason, is better at tuning into those traumatic moments where maybe linguistically we didn't record the memory, but we sure do remember how it felt, right? Maybe we didn't record in language memories from childhood, but we can kind of have impressions of what we saw, what we felt, what we seem to understand in the moment, even without words, right? And then our conscious mind's very meaningful job is to add those things up together, right? And so subconscious work helps us point and find the map to our healing. And to get really specific, when you have a wound you want to heal, dream about it. Let yourself sleep a lot more. Write down your dreams. Focus on your dreams. That's an easy way to get in on your subconscious mind. And you don't necessarily have to do any work with your dreams to change them, although I've done podcasts on the topic, and many people who are smarter and more studied than me have written books on the topic and whatever. Like lucid dreaming or directed dreaming, where you set an intention for what you'll do when you see certain stimuli in a dream, are very useful trauma healing tools. But even without doing that, just to learn about yourself and what you're dealing with and what you're facing, dream work is powerful. And dream work, just in terms of like listening, paying attention, waking up and recording it. And a lot of people say they don't remember their dreams. And I'm about to tell you why. It's because our dreams happen with our subconscious mind, that part of ourself that existed before language, that is tapped into actually a much wider array of communication. And then when we try to put it into language in our conscious mind, which is what we try to do when we verbally recount a memory to someone or to ourselves when we write it down, sometimes the words are insufficient, and sometimes it's so insufficient that like we have this barrier between our conscious and our subconscious, and we can't remember it long enough to try to find the right words. However, I will tell you that that's a skill building thing. It's not an on-off switch. I'm just going to take a quick moment to tell you, a lot of people see things as black and white when they're actually a skill building thing. And I just want to ask you to have this in your head. Is this something I'm seeing as black and white when it could be a skill building thing? People say, I don't remember my dreams. Are you sure you don't remember your dreams? Or is it that you've never had the chance to build the skill of remembering your dreams a little better, right? Is it possible that having perfect dream recall And having zero dream recall has a lot of space in between. And you could like remember a smidgen of your dreams, right? Remember how something felt, remember a color or an impression or an idea, and at least put that into words. And as you do that, you're building the skill until you begin to have better and better dream recall, because that's how skill building works. You don't know how to do a thing at first. And then you slowly learn, right? I'm not flexible. Okay, well, nobody starts out and stays flexible except for people who have hypermobility, right? We build flexibility. I'm not strong. Well, okay, you know what? Like there's a lot of people who like literally make a living teaching people to get stronger in like fitness clubs and gyms and stuff like that, right? It's not an on-off switch. It's a skill issue. We can slowly begin to build the skills towards something. And I recommend building the skills to communicate with your subconscious. Dream work is a great way to do that. Another way to do it is like art that you're drawn to. Anything that gives you a feeling and you don't know why is a big flag moment to be like, wow, my subconscious is doing something. You know, have you ever looked at a painting and gone like, wow, I feel this big sense of loss and I don't know why? Or heard a song and gone like, this makes me cry? Or done a yoga pose and burst into tears and not understood why? And then it's clear that something beyond our conscious mind is at play. And our whole job is to listen. Our whole job is to listen to it the way that we would listen quietly if we're nice people, if we're nice people and we know how to deal with children, right? To a child who woke up from a nightmare, right? And they like when a kid wakes up in the middle of the night from a nightmare and they kind of need to tell you how scary it is. And like they need mirroring. Children need mirroring, emotional mirroring at different stages in their development. The validation, basically, in adult terms of what they were feeling, right? And the right way to help a kid with a nightmare isn't to be like, shh, it's just a dream, you know, like dismiss it, but to say, oh, that must have been scary, like to let them feel it and to then let them know they're safe, right? To like let them express their emotions and validate that, yeah, you're allowed to be scared of a dream. That must have been scary and you're safe now, right? Like to build on the story, it's yes and energy, right? Like, shh, don't talk about it energy, right? And we have to be willing to build a relationship with our subconscious just as we would with a child who had difficulty expressing themselves, right? When a kid throws a tantrum, they don't have their biggest communication tools in the moment, right? They're pretty upset and they might their whole method of communication might just be like yelling. And you're like, okay, buddy, I can see you're upset. And then part of your job is to try and get them calm enough to express what's going on, you know, and probably also at some point to talk about what behavior is helpful and not helpful when they're feeling this way. But like, we got to do the unraveling work first, right? We got to learn, well, what is it that's upsetting you? And like, let's talk about getting you the skills to address that instead of screaming, right? And that's really what we're doing when we're doing subconscious healing work. What is it that's making me feel that way? Why did I burst into tears when I did fish pose in yoga for the first time? What the hell, right? We're gently holding our own hand and doing that unraveling work. So a big portion of self-healing is listening. I kind of want to divide the self-healing process into listening or paying attention, like identifying the problem, and then triage, right? Like let's stop the immediate emergency. If you're having a panic attack, you got to do something about that panic attack, right? If a kid is having a tantrum, we need to calm them down. If someone is bleeding, like we need to stop the bleeding, triage, right? And then the deeper healing, right? And then we can look deeper into like, okay, what is it that caused this, right? If we're having a panic attack, we need to learn some somatic skills or whatever skills or access to medication or access to techniques, whatever it is that works for us to help us not have that panic attack. We need to be able to get out of it, right? And then, ideally, we look deeper and say, why did this thing give me a panic attack? And how can I gently, without causing another panic attack right away, unravel this and do the healing that gets at the root cause, right? Right? If you're a hemophiliac, which is someone who kind of is prone to uncontrollable bleeding, you're spending a lot of time, probably in your childhood, on triage, meaning the adults around you are spending a lot of time just getting you to stop bleeding, especially because it's particularly hard for you, right? But also, like, finding out at some point, oh, my blood won't clot, that's why I can't stop bleeding, allows you then to have a deeper, better treatment that prevents you from having these random bursts of bleeding in the first place. And that's a little bit what inner healing is like. You do the listening, you do the triage that's needed to get you out of what feels like, you know, whether it's a panic attack or whether it's, bursting into tears because you've had a realization or whether it's whatever. or whether it's an anger response. You do the triage work to help you re-regulate your nervous system. And then this part's the follow through. We look deeper to ask ourselves, okay, this was scary. I had this big scary experience. Instead of ignoring it, how can I dig deep enough to heal myself so that I don't have to keep living this way? And that to me is like where the rubber hits the road. And so listening is a big part of it. Triage is another part. When we talk about healing, we do want to deal with anything that feels emergent. And I'm going to use that like emergency word as like a little bit subjective. Does it feel like an emergency to you, right? A panic attack feels like an emergency to the person having it. And someone who is experienced in dealing with panic attacks might be like, hey, you know what? You're actually okay. Nothing bad is going to happen to you. You're just having a panic attack. However, we have to walk the line, if we are that person, between saying like, hey, I'm reassuring you, you're not having a medical emergency, this is a panic attack, and saying this is just a panic attack in a way that's dismissive, like you're not experiencing anything, stop being dramatic about it. That's not helpful, right? We need to learn the tools that will help us in the moment when we're having a big moment, because we will have them. And often the way we become aware that inner healing work needs to be done is because we have them, right? Because we get triggered perhaps. And we need to identify what the tools are to deal with and help ourselves in those moments. And then we need the follow through. And the follow through is really what I want to talk about today, the listening and the follow through, because I think those two, I view those as kind of like a continuum. We're listening by paying attention to that scary dream we had, right? And by writing down our feelings about it. And then we identify like, okay, maybe this dream was about that. And maybe I have some work to do around this. And then we move into follow through where we're like, okay, maybe I can identify what happened that made me feel so scared like the first time. Or maybe I can identify if there's something in my life that's causing me this type of anxiety, or maybe I can change my behavior around this topic so that I feel a little safer about it, right? And that's the follow through. When we identify possible actions we can take, and then we move back into listening. We try it, right? If it's negative self-talk, if we're like always beating ourselves up around a certain topic, and we're like, oh wow, I just realized I have all this negative self-talk and it's making me feel bad, right? Listening. I think it maybe comes from this, because when I say that, the voice in my head really sounds like, I don't know, my 5th grade science teacher or whatever, right? I think it's because of this moment. Like, that's listening. We identified where it came from, and then we can do a little exploring. We can say, okay, what might have been more helpful to me in that moment, and can I give myself some of that energy now? Can I be the adult that I needed when I was a kid, right? Then we move into the follow through. Then we move into, now I'm trying something new. Okay. I feel terrified to speak up when I have an unmet need, because that one time when I was 10 years old and I really had to pee and I raised my hand and asked to be excused, and the teacher screamed at me in front of everyone and humiliated me. And now I'm afraid to let people know my needs, for example, right? Broad example. And then we have to ask ourselves, what can I do differently about this, right? Maybe we can be the adult we needed then. Maybe what we needed was a teacher who tuned in and saw, oh, okay, you need something. Yes, go take care of your needs. And maybe we need to be that tuned in with ourselves for our needs a little bit. Maybe we need to regularly scan our body and ask ourselves, do I need anything in the moment? Is there anything I could do to make myself feel a little more comfortable and be nice to ourselves while we do it? Because we just realized that we have some shit around it, right? There's the explicit rating. Maybe like then that's a follow through thing, right? Then we're like, here's the intention and I'm going to do these practices to try to heal myself, right? And then we move back into listening so that we know when to do them. And so it's like intention, practice, listening, intention, practice, listening, intention, practice, listening. It's a continuum. And some of the tools that help on that continuum are meditation, especially guided meditation, especially meditation perhaps where you meet a part of yourself. In either direction, meaning more healed or less healed. We meet a part of ourselves that's in the wound, and maybe we also meet a part of ourselves that is like the higher version of ourselves that has already solved this problem, who can give us some good advice on how to, move forward. Especially guided meditations where we do this type of self-work. We can also just do general meditation, right? But a meditation that allows us to have that dialogue with ourselves is helpful. Similarly, having dialogue with ourselves by writing in our journal. Maybe even there's a part of ourselves that we want to understand better, and maybe we start it by being pen pals and we journal a letter to that part of ourselves, and we let that part of ourselves write back, and we establish a dialogue in that way. I'm going to talk more about that in Which You Got This, because that's going to be kind of my recommendation for like, boom, like how to try a self-healing thing is to become pen pals with your inner self. We can also like get outside help. That's really important. We can call something like a crisis hotline or 311 if we're in the city, or, we can reach out for a therapist. We can reach out for, if you're employed, an employee assistance program, often has therapy resources. Sometimes your town does different things. Can we get outside help? Can we get community help? Can we reach out to friends and family selectively, choosing perhaps not the people who traumatized us, but instead people who we think are likely to understand, right? Can we ask them for help, or can we just ask them to listen, or can we bounce ideas and kind of communicate as we go what we need, And importantly, healing isn't just the hard stuff. We've been talking about the hard stuff, but can we heal in ways that gives us joy and fun, and indeed maybe gives us some positive reinforcement for doing the work, right? Can your inner child get some treats and fun along the way of healing instead of being asked to show up to a painful therapy session every time you have something to work through, right? Can you also show up for your inner child and be like, hey, we're going to the zoo today, we're going to feed a zebra. I don't know what that's going to be like. Let's have a great time, right? Can we also find ways to look at those healing parts of themselves and ask themselves, what would be amazing? What would make you feel so good? And give ourselves that joy and pleasure. Can healing through joy and pleasure be a concept we introduce ourselves to? Because yes, there is hard work in healing. Yes, we do have to work with the wound, which can be painful. And also, yes, we can heal by introducing pleasure and joy that perhaps we missed out on during our development because of this, because of whatever we're going through. How can we write a new script and give it to ourselves as a gift? If we've experienced something, we can do this. There was a moment where TikTok was all talking about dream scripting. And specifically, the practice, as someone explained it to me, it was somebody's mom who was like, you're spiritual and my kid is asking about dream scripting. Tell me what it is. And I had to kind of like go look it up. And she was like, what they say it is you write down the script of the dream you want to have, and then you put it under your pillow at night, and then you dream the dream, right? And they're like, and I'm like, oh, a lot of people try to control their dreams that way, and there's a lot of different ways to kind of do that kind of thing and all of that, and do dream work. And they're like, no, they're saying it's very different. It's specifically the thing. And I'm like, well, I think you already know what it is if you have this very specific idea. But can we engage in a little scripting for ourselves? Can we say to ourselves, I had this bad experience, bad conversation, thing that gave me a panic attack. Can I give myself a new script for next time something like it happens, right? Something like it. Can I say, the root of this was this. As soon as I heard this word, my brain went off the rails, right? And it made me upset. Or as soon as someone touched me in this way, spoke to me in this way, this thing happened, I felt this feeling in my body, whatever it was. Can I give myself a new script? And sometimes a script is just listening, just building a pause. That's the easiest script to write, right? When I feel this sensation in my chest, like the floor just dropped out below me and I feel scared, I will take 5 deep breaths and take a pause. And like reading that script to ourselves in the morning to reaffirm to our brains, that's what we do. Hey, that's what we do when we feel this feeling, right? Can we write a new script that way? Can we write a new script with our dreams? If we're having nightmares, if we're having bad dreams, when I have this bad dream that I can't figure out, but it makes me cry every time, can I stop in the dream and say, what does this represent to me? And ask the thing that's scaring me. I've done this, by the way, and like I've gotten some wild answers. And I will say, I don't know that they're always like, it doesn't always solve the problem. It does, however, take it from a scary dream to a problem-solving dream, right? I have had dreams where I was like, there was like a villain or something, and I'm like, what do you represent? And the villain was like, your ex-girlfriend. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. My ex-girlfriend would never do anything like this. Are you sure? But it starts a conversation, right? And it allows you to move from panic into listening, right? And then you and your villain are trying to solve your psychological problem. How cool is that, right? So writing a new script, and I highly recommend for the new script, if you don't know what to do, make it about pausing. Make it about calming your nervous system and then listening, and then like tuning in, asking a question, getting curious, right? Pause and curiosity, I would say. And can we identify habits that might help our healing, right? And I want to do this without too big of a to-do list, because as a workaholic, I'm like, well, what I need to do is meditate every day for this many minutes. And what I need to do also is make sure I get this many minutes of cardio in. And I also need to do yoga every day. And I also need to blah, blah, blah. And I also need to, and I also need to, and I also need to. And then it becomes a to-do list. And I'm doing the workaholism thing, not the healing thing, right? But can we gently and slowly, one step at a time, identify habits that might help us with healing? If we're like, well, okay, every single time I have this conversation with this person, I kind of act in a way I don't want to act. So what kind of habits can I identify to make this easier, right? And maybe it's like, maybe it's building some time before the conversation to write down, here's what I want to see happen and here's what I don't want to do, right? And to have that physically in front of us when we have the conversation. Maybe we limit the communication with that person. Maybe it's so hard to talk to them that we say, hey, you know what? When we're talking about this topic, I need a break. Or I actually need to ask if we can maybe write letters or emails about this topic, because one-on-one is too hard. Or maybe I need a third party there to help moderate us, or maybe I just need to not talk to you about this until I've done some deep thinking about it, right? Can we identify what would make something easier on us instead of just, I'll just go into battle again, right? Can we identify, maybe I can approach this in a way that's easier or gentler on me? Because remember, when we talked about skill issues, like it's not an on-off switch, it's a skill issue. When we're having trouble with something emotionally, and we just keep banging against the same thing that gives us trouble, we're just going to keep re-triggering ourselves. If we ask ourselves, can I do this at an easier level, right? Like if you can't, for example, I can't do regular push-ups. I can't. And trying to do 10 push-ups when I couldn't do one push-up every day didn't help me get good at doing push-ups. But learning the different ways to modify a push-up allowed me to build enough strength to get good at a modified push-up so that then I could move on to the next harder modified push-up. And eventually maybe I could do the grown-up push-up, right? It's a skill thing. It's not an on-off switch. I still can't do a grown-up push-up. I can do a modified push-up, and I can do a harder modified push-up than when I started, right? It's allowing for room in that spectrum. So is there a way we can back off the skill level and say, this is really hard for me, so what can I do to take it 3 notches easier and see how that goes, right? The same way a musician practices with a metronome and is like, I can't do this at time. Maybe I'll try it a whole bunch slower and see if I can do it there, right? And then build up. We're allowed to make things easier for ourselves. Moving into Which You Got This. Which You Got This is a part of the podcast where I give you a simple strategy that you can implement right now to deal with the topic that we are talking about. And the strategy I want to give you is becoming a pen pal to yourself. So here is the practice. The practice is identify, is there a part of yourself that you know needs some healing? Maybe it's an age, maybe it's a thing around a thing that happened to you, right? Maybe it's a specific time in your life. Oh, I was going through this relationship with this person between the ages of 25 to 29, right? Maybe it's more like complex PTSD, where it's not that there was one defining moment, but there was a long-term experience of trauma and stress and anxiety. And it's like, I don't need to talk to the me from that one moment. I just generally, broadly need to look at the part of me, like who I was during that period. You know what I mean? And that might be me at 13 and it might be me at 19 and, depending on what thing we're talking about that day, because the trauma was over a longer period of time, right? So you can decide, who are we writing to? And I invite you to write both to your higher self, your more healed self, and your less healed self. So maybe we're writing in our journal to both, right? Pretend it's an email and you can CC them both, right? And we're writing like, hey, I want to deal with this, whatever. I started crying in yoga class and I have a clue that it might have to do with this because I got a weird flash of memory, but I don't know. So can we talk about it? And higher self, I'm copying you on this email because I'm hoping that you might have some good ideas about how to go that I haven't figured out yet. And also, wounded self, I'm emailing you because I know that you are what came out today, during my yoga class. And I want to hear your take on what happened, and I understand that it might be a little hard for you to communicate. So I want you to know how patient I'll be with you. Sometimes those parts of ourselves are not always verbal. It might be difficult, and let's give ourselves permission to respond as both. This is like a creativity exercise. And I do this a lot with my intuition students. Something that they taught me was that not everyone just has like an intuitive self that they can just like tap into and be like, yes, I'm in the intuitive space. I'm getting this download, right? No, for many of us, we need prompts. And just as a lot of writers get together and like write a poem based on a prompt. They're like, the prompt is blah, 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 summer in the city, now write, right? And the prompt sometimes can unlock our creativity a little bit. So consider this to be a creativity exercise. And that's often a hack or a workaround for accessing both your intuition as well as your inner landscape. Consider it a creativity exercise, Don't put a lot of pressure on yourself to do it just right or to tune into the exact right frequency. Consider it an exercise where you're like, well, what do I think my younger self might say? Let's see, just start. And give yourself an opportunity to respond as your younger self. Give yourself an opportunity to really be in the soup about it, to like really explain as best you can all the things you do and don't understand. I don't know. My heart was beating fast and I wanted to cry and it felt like this thing and I don't really know why. And here's what I do know about it, right? That could be the letter back from your younger self. Or maybe your younger self is like, responds in pictures. Maybe your younger self is like, I got this idea in my head and I don't know why here, right? Like your younger self or inner wounded self or whatever you want to call it is allowed to respond in any wild, crazy way they want. Whatever helps them get it across, even if it doesn't seem to help. And then your higher self tunes in. And your higher self might act as a loving mediator, a loving third party and say, okay, I see you're trying to work this out. Here's what I see. And your higher self's job is to kind of look for cues and help look for clues and unravel a little bit and maybe like add some layers of meaning, understand a little better what your younger self is trying to say. And maybe we just have this letter writing process. Maybe we set aside a time once a week, whatever time is good for you. Maybe it's Fridays at 3:00. Maybe that's a tarot time. Maybe pick another one where you're like, it's time for me to have my pen pal time, right? And you just write a letter in whatever persona is next on the docket, right? Maybe you're as yourself, maybe you're as your higher self, maybe you're as your wounded self, and you just like, I'm just going to write my letter this week. And that's a beautiful way to also let yourself heal at a pace. Because I think sometimes, especially with catharsis, we think we have to get it done all at once. We think, I'm broken and I have to fix it. You've been living this way for a long time. It's okay for your healing to be slow. It took you a long time to feel this way, to get to this point. It's okay if it takes you a little time to get better, right? Like, you wouldn't go to the doctor with a broken leg and be like, I need to run a marathon tomorrow, fix me, right? Because they'd be like, I'm sorry, buddy, we're going to have to manage your expectations around that. Because you're going to, instead, here's what you need to heal, right? And forcing yourself to take it at that slow pace of like, I'm going to write a letter. Because then what will happen is all week you'll be thinking about it and your subconscious mind will also be working on the problem. And then by the time you come back and write the next letter, you'll have some new insights just as a result of that time going by. So try this at home. Become your own pen pal. Write letters to your wounded self, write letters to your higher self, and just see how you can heal. Let me know if you try this. I love this idea. I would love to see if it works for you. This has been a rambly kind of episode because I have a lot of ideas on this topic, but the truth about healing and the truth about trauma and the truth about emotional work is that it's non-linear. And that's why it's hard to put together, for me, a linear episode on this. I did my best to kind of organize my thoughts for you. But healing is something, especially emotional healing, where it's like sometimes you find something that really helps and really makes a difference. And sometimes you find a big cathartic moment, and sometimes that's very meaningful, but you need the follow through. And sometimes something that completely did not expect brings you healing in a moment of like supreme luck, right? And we have to let ourselves have all parts of that process. And if we want to go towards it, we have to remember not to put pressure on ourselves to make a linear process. Instead, we align ourselves with what we want and we start walking. What is it that I want? I want healing around this. I have an idea of what that would be like, and I start walking towards it. And I don't know what the path will demand of me. I just know how to start walking, and that's okay. All you have to do is be walking in the right direction, right? So that's the thought I will leave you with. If you would like to share your thoughts around this topic or another topic or any witchy thing, because I'm a nerd, reach out. I am sassafrastarot@gmail.com, or you can find me on any social media at Sassafras Tarot, SassafrasTarot, on Instagram, TikTok, Threads. Sometimes I'm not as good at updating Threads. Facebook, all those places, basically. Find me, chat with me. If you would like to support this podcast financially, you can do so at patreon.com and unlock exclusive benefits, such as getting to see these live recorded episodes live as they happen, getting your own ideas, thoughts, and questions into the episode as a patron, getting early cards on the Witchy Weather Report. Someone has already requested a card for my Witchy Weather Report, which is in 2 weeks, on the Patron Discord. Also having access to the Patron Discord, where we all talk about our different journeys and experiences and stuff like that. Getting bonus episodes for the $5 and up patrons, and getting a monthly card pull just for you as a $10 patron. If you would like to be a part of that, I would love to have you in the community. Patreon.com/Sassafras Tarot. Or if you would just love to broadly be in my community, like go search Sassafras Tarot wherever you, whatever social media you hang out on, follow me and let's be pals. Friends, I wish you a good, non-linear, beautiful, weird healing journey. I'll talk to you soon.